Well, hello and welcome back to The Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we chronicle transcendent truth by traveling further up and further into the classic works of children's literature.
This is Season 10, Episode 2, The Trolls, which covers Chapter 2 of The Hobbit.
Chapter 2 of The Hobbit, Roast Mutton. Very interesting chapter title because many of the other chapters, like An Unexpected Party, A Short Rest, Riddles in the Dark, very on brand. Like very much you're like, oh, okay, this is what it's about. Roast mutton, the mutton really plays a back seat here in this chapter.
Right.
I like, very subtle. It's like one of
It
those
has
songs.
maybe a second or two of screen time.
You know, it's like a song
Airtime.
by like an indie artist where it's like there's like one line and like this third verse, like that's the name of the song. You know,
Yeah.
it's like not the words that repeat over and over again in the chorus.
You know what I really miss? The smash cut to credits edits that they would do.
Okay.
That's what I think
When they
of.
would say like the
They, as soon as the line was said, they would
the movie.
in the movie. And that's what I think of when you finally get to the roast mutton part and the chapter ends.
YouTube used to be so much simpler.
Yeah.
When it was just like some dude uploading stuff in his basement.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as a YouTuber back then.
Right.
It was just a guy.
Kids
Or
wanted
girl,
to be
you
things
know?
like astronauts and firefighters.
Yeah. Nobody wanted to be an influencer yet. We're certainly not influencers, right? Not just because, you know, there's our moms only people that listen to this, but
People can't see us. They don't know what they can't.
we're not selling anything either.
Right.
Right? That's a big part of being an influencer. The only thing we would tell you to buy is like more books, and we're not getting any, you know,
Yeah.
no referrals here.
Yeah. No referral links.
Well, Phil, we've got chapter 2 of The Hobbit. We had a great time going through the introduction of the dwarves and Gandalf, really all of our characters, obviously, last chapter. But it's here in the second chapter that the adventure truly begins. Do you have our summary?
I do. Chapter 2. Upon waking up, Bilbo begins cleaning and is disappointed that the group left without including him in the adventure. Gandalf appears, points out the note on the mantle, hustles the hobbit out of the door and down the road, reuniting him with the dwarves, before everyone sets off on their ponies. After crossing an ancient stone bridge and stopping to set up camp, they are startled to find that Gandalf is no longer with them. A light is spotted in the distance, and upon Bilbo's investigation, the entire group is captured by trolls. Gandalf rescues everyone by distracting the trolls until the sun comes up, freezing them in stone forever. With the immediate threat eliminated, the dwarves, Bilbo, and Gandalf raid the nearby cave and walk away with a bunch of gold coins and swords. Gandalf tells of the danger ahead and a place called Rivendell.
Place called Rivendell. Looking forward to that, but we've got a ways to go before we actually get to the Hidden Valley. Let's talk about the way that this chapter starts off. So Bilbo pops up, if we remember at the end of... I shouldn't say pops up, because he clearly sleeps in quite a bit.
Significantly.
When was... Okay, you've got a 1 and... Not quite 1.5, but you're getting close to 18 months there with your son. What's the latest you have slept in the last year and a half? It's certainly not almost 11 a.m.
I made it to 7:08 one time.
That's so nice.
Pretty good. I did. There was a time last week where I almost made it till 8, and that was great. But that was because there were 3 other people in the house taking care of
That is nice, yeah.
the baby.
I was out of town at a conference out of the state not too long ago, and I just skipped breakfast every morning just so I could sleep in. Like
Yeah.
the conference started at 8 a.m. I rolled out of bed at 7:45, got a super quick shower, went down to the bottom of the hotel. Was like, it's worth it. Like
Yeah.
I'd rather skip breakfast
Yeah.
than have to wake up early when I finally get a chance to sleep in.
Yeah, and you're not missing much, like some kind of overripe or underripe cantaloupe and
Yeah, it's
sad yogurt.
It's fine. It's a lot of melon, and you're like, this is like I'm not a fan of this.
I don't know which continent that breakfast is served on, but it's not.
It's
not a great place to be.
I don't think we talk a lot about both Lewis's and Tolkien's use of just the way they describe food so often. I don't know if there's any descriptions of melon or different types of melons.
Yeah, not that I can think of. And
None
we've
I'm
read all the
thinking.
books.
I've got the Kindle in front of me. As I search for the word melon in The Hobbit, I have found none. I'm not going to go through all of the Narnia books, but yeah, none of that was appearing at the dinner last night. So So Bilbo does wake up, and there's an interesting thing that happens. We talked quite a bit about these two sides of him, right? The Tookish part and the Baggins part. And the first paragraph ends with this sentence where it says, "And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him." So you mentioned this in your summary, but Bilbo wakes up and he's actually, again, not completely disappointed, but just a trifle disappointed that, oh, I guess they did go on without me.
He's a little resigned as he starts cleaning up. And he's in no rush. He just kind of starts doing everything. But you can tell that he's preoccupied slightly later when Gandalf tells him that he's not himself because he doesn't dust the mantle.
That's right, yes.
And he is cleaning up after a very large party the night before.
And breakfast that he slept through.
Yeah, and then he has a lot of stuff to catch up on because he slept through.
But you're right. Gandalf does appear. Gandalf tells him, the dwarves, they're actually waiting for you at the Green Dragon Inn. And he says they left you a note, right? Which, let's talk about this. A little silly. Leaving the note, like, on the mantelpiece. Like, I would have, I don't know.
Why would you hide it? Also, why wouldn't you wake him up?
Put it, like, right outside of his door, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted to leave a note for your son, again, he's not reading yet. He's a smart kid, but, year and a half. And you would put it right outside the door, right? I feel like that'd be appropriate way. That would be an appropriate way of not waking someone up, but making sure they got the message.
Yes.
But maybe this is dwarfish culture. We just don't understand it.
Yeah, there's probably
there's something in the appendices that tells us, and that's why dwarves always leave morning messages on the mantelpiece.
Was that an Arrested Development voice?
No, that wasn't. No, and that's why you always leave a note. So this note, though, let's talk about it. This note, incredibly formal. From Thorin, it says, "To burglar Bilbo, greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms, cash on delivery up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn by water at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual." And he goes on, he signs his name. Thorin did not speak like this last night. I have lots of questions for you, especially about the dwarves in this chapter. Is he making fun of Bilbo, or is this purposefully formal because it's in writing and Thorin's trying to be?
I feel like
or is he teasing
it's
him?
the contract aspect of it.
Okay.
We're making a deal here. We're writing it down, and maybe this is how you write letters. It's very different than speaking out loud, and this is a completely different time and different world. So maybe it being more formal is part of that. It definitely helps you separate it from our current place, and years later it would be a text message. But even back in the 30s, I don't think it would be quite so formal. This feels more like 1700s.
Well, you certainly, because I've been reading through a lot of Tolkien and obviously Lewis's letters over the years, but especially these last few months as we're preparing and working our way through these first few chapters of The Hobbit. As I read a lot of Tolkien and Lewis's letters, now obviously I've read way more of Lewis's letters over the years, but even the ones that Lewis is writing, not just to friends, but to people who've written him. So they're a little bit more formal because he doesn't know these people. He still is relatively casual, like things like the word wood. He often would just put WD period, those kind of things. And Tolkien is a little bit of that, not to the same extent, but he's a little casual too. I was just simply wondering if this was, I'd never thought about this before. I might be reading too deeply into it. I was almost wondering if Thorin is a bit kind of poking fun at Bilbo. I do wonder, do they actually expect him to show up? Do they expect Bilbo to show up here?
The emphasis of the word punctual in our copy, it's italicized.
Yeah, that's right.
Trusting that you will be punctual, but then also not waking him up and hiding it under the mantelpiece.
So that's the part of me that's almost like...
I am now wondering if he is messing with him.
if he's messing with them, or at least maybe they are being overly formal so that you can be like, no, we weren't trying to leave you. Did you see how legit this letter was? I do wonder. We don't know much about, and we'll get to this in just a moment. We don't really know how Thorin necessarily reacts, other than saying, "Up you two get and off we go." Once they get here and they give Bilbo a pony, we hear a little bit more from Dwalin, but you almost wonder if Thorin is a little bit more, rolling his eyes, a little bit more annoyed by Bilbo's inclusion on the adventure.
I wonder if he's writing it this way to set him up for, if you're not going to be high caliber, then we're going to leave without you.
Mm-hmm.
And he's writing everything the way he does, saying you must be punctual, and then he's leaving.
Yes.
And they're probably going to leave on time with or without Bilbo. And I think that's why Gandalf steps in and keeps things moving, where he wouldn't normally have to help, but he wants this thing to get started.
He wants to make sure it gets done, and that's something we'll continue to unpack. The idea of why exactly has Gandalf picked Bilbo. What's really interesting is the moment that the adventure actually begins is a little bit inexplicable. Bilbo ends up out of his house, running down to buy water.
And he doesn't have any of his stuff.
He doesn't have his stuff, and he can't even really... It's almost like the Tookish part of him takes over without him really realizing it. What Tolkien says is, to the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money or anything that he usually took when he went out. And he even is left... I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he leaves his breakfast half finished. He didn't even clean it up, right? And we now know he's not going to be back for a long time. He just leaves things there. All of this is very out of character for Bilbo. And so is this some kind of magic that Gandalf is doing? Gandalf's not really... There is a little incantation or spell that we hear is given at the end of this chapter as they're hiding the gold. But knowing not just Gandalf in this book, but even throughout the entire Legendarium, the way that Gandalf's magic works, it's not like he's doing Harry Potter spells and stuff like that. His magic is always a little bit more under the radar, right? It's more atmospheric in a way. And so is there some magic at play here that Bilbo just is kind of overcome, or is this just this Tookish side taking over? I think it's an interesting thing for us to unpack.
I think there's a maybe psychological magic with Gandalf. Just he appears, he tells him, you have to go right now. And then I think that combines well with the Tookish side, where Bilbo didn't have to run out.
Certainly
he could have said, well, it sounds like it's too late.
Oh, too late.
But because it's just enough time to get there, he does run off.
Yeah.
And you can tell he does want to do this adventure. It doesn't last too long, though, because he's pretty miserable pretty quickly.
Well, and as he arrives, what's interesting is that both Thorin and Dwalin, and we can maybe assume the rest of the dwarves here, all kind of roll their eyes at Bilbo, like, this guy's not prepared, right? Dwalin says, you will have to manage without... I'll do it in a voice, hold on. Dwalin says, you'll have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. When Bilbo says...
You've been practicing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I read it a lot with both students and my own children, right? And Dwalin's kind of saying, as Bilbo realizes, I forgot these things... Dwalin's like, yeah, man, you're not tough like us. In just a few pages, the dwarves are complaining about having to camp.
Yeah.
And on top of all these things, one of the things that came up to me just reading through it together, or reading through it for this particular season of the podcast, it is unclear to me if the dwarves have weapons. And the reason I say that is because when they fight the trolls... Thorin later on is going to pick out a stick to fight the trolls with, and they then obviously take some of the weapons from the trolls' horde later. Do they, they don't actually seem to be nearly as prepared for this journey and adventure, both like from a materials perspective, but also psychologically.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting because these are not... these wonderful heroes. These are kind of, in some ways, these outcast misfits, right?
This feels like you're gathering a random troop of people who happen to be available instead of these are experienced.
Which makes sense, right? Because
robbers.
Thorin does, and he does have this kind of gravitas, right? Above the rest of the dwarves. And like he's the one who actually is regal. And then all these other people, I think Fili and Kili, obviously they would be considered that because they're related to him. But everyone else is just kind of there, and they're not, they're a little arrogant here. They're a little, full of themselves. And the way that they treat Bilbo is, it's just ironic because, you're going to have to handle all this stuff. And then we know that, who is it? I think, is it Dorian, or I don't know which ones it is. Dorian Nori, maybe? I don't know. Who later on are like, we're not eating enough. And it's like, well, then how are they making fun of Bilbo for not wanting to eat enough either?
Right. As someone who has brought too much stuff on a trip and then had everybody benefit from the extra stuff that I brought, I understand how Bilbo must feel. I don't necessarily need a handkerchief, but I do get wanting to provide a little bit of comfort for especially a long journey.
Yeah.
So Bilbo he doesn't have all his stuff with him. He leaves anyway, which is incredible. Gandalf goes and gets all his stuff for him.
He gets some of those important things, right?
Brings him some provisions. And then good thing too, because they're having an okay journey so far, but then it gets pretty slimy. There's mud everywhere. They're splashing around. Mm-hmm. It's pouring with rain. Everybody's a little too grumpy to talk.
And pretty quickly too, just sorry to interrupt you, but they leave kind of again, it's never referred to as the Shire. They leave the Hobbit lands. And there's a great little, just one short, quick paragraph, quite unlike something you would see in Lord of the Rings, but much more like something you would see in Narnia. The description of them going from these places, they go through the Hobbit lands, they kind of leave the country of decent folk into these places where people speak strangely. They even see some castles that have an evil look to them.
Yeah, old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people.
This very much feels the way Lewis often describes Narnia, where there's hints of history, but very few details given to us. This is like Lewis describing the time before the White Witch and Lion Witch the Wardrobe, or some of the ways that we hear about, like the tower that they go to in the last battle, that Rilian and them kind of take refuge inside of, where you don't know much about it. Tolkien, later on in the Legendarium, obviously in Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion to a lesser extent, would have said, though they're going by, and he would have named the particular places, I think, often, or gone back through. But here, we're not given names. And so that to me legitimately feels more fairy tale-esque.
Yes.
And because of that, feels more like MacDonald and more like Lewis.
And there is 15 years between the two?
It's 37 to 54, almost 20.
Okay. To me, I'm so curious. What stands out is how different it is, because I recently read the Lord of the Rings, and I'm curious how much is Tolkien changing and how much is he's developed enough that now he wants to refer to the things by name.
Well, this actually brings us in. I'll read at the end of today's episode, but for our enchanted epistle later today, I have another letter by Lewis about The Hobbit, and where he had something very nice to say last time. This one is much more negative. We don't see a lot of negative by Lewis about Tolkien's work. We see it a lot more the other way, right?
Yeah.
From Tolkien to Lewis. But it deals a little bit with this. And did you read through Anderson's annotated Hobbit for this chapter?
Not for this chapter.
So we won't go into a ton of the stuff that's in. There's so many great things. And again, if you're reading along with us this season, go pick up the annotated Hobbit. It's great. We also recommend Ratliff's The History of the Hobbit, but that's 1,000 pages long. And the annotated Hobbit's much more accessible. But one of the things he does throughout all of the annotated Hobbit is wherever Tolkien made changes to the manuscript or changes when he revised the book. So like after publication, I think one of the ones was like 56. I might be wrong on there, but so he's doing some revising after he has finished writing The Lord of the Rings, and he does go in and he does make some changes to things. Some of it just much smaller things about kind of the way he addresses the audience, but there are a few things where he does try to make things line up with The Lord of the Rings, especially the geography, because he's not thinking much of the map of Middle Earth and all these things in the same way. In fact, one of the interesting things is later on in the chapter, from where the hobbits cross that stone bridge, the one you mentioned in your your summary there to when they go to the trolls, where we actually learn in the Fellowship of the Ring, the Aragorn and the hobbits go over that, and it takes them about 6 days until they meet
That's a long bridge.
the statue of the trolls.
Oh.
But that all happens in one night here, and there's just certain things where these just don't line up, and I actually kind of really like that, because what we're doing is we're reading this is looking at the ways that really and truly, yes, this is a preface to Lord of the Rings, but it really does stand out as being quite different. And I love the fact, because this is a Tolkien that we don't often see. This is more in line with the Tolkien that we read in Smith of Wootton Major, or if you go look at like Farmer Giles of Ham or of Rover Random, than it is of the Tolkien you find in Lord of the Rings. And I love both of those Tolkiens, but I think that the closer that we're reading this, the more we actually see the differences in Hobbit Tolkien.
Yeah. There's also, I'm curious how the narrator is choosing to do this, where maybe you can stretch a few facts. You can say that this crossing happened
Sure.
a little faster, but also it is a longer time ago, but it doesn't quite hold up because of how detailed the Lord of the Rings is.
Yeah.
So I think that what you're sharing does confirm that he probably hadn't thought of all these things yet, and then once he knows them, he goes back and changes it.
But in some ways, it's almost more fairy tale-esque. As we were going through MacDonald, we talked a lot about MacDonald's very one-dimensional characters, which for us as modern reader, as postmodern readers, we just think of one-dimensional characters as being like innately negative, like overly simplistic and bad. Often, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but in general, I'm saying I do this, right? I go, oh, that's too simple, right? That's for kids, right? Whereas we've read through so many things by so many of the authors we've studied over the course of this show, we realize that's wrong. And MacDonald really showed us that. I mean, think about, I don't think there was a single quote unquote 3-dimensional character in The Princess and the Goblin.
Yeah.
There weren't. And actually, if you look at,
And you can even see that in the animated version. They're
certainly
literally all 2-dimensional.
but it's honestly quite true of the dwarves here. Obviously not remotely true of Bilbo. Definitely not of Thorin. Maybe like Thorin right now. Not true of Gandalf. Although Gandalf is we don't know as much about what he's thinking and doing. But the dwarves, the other 12 dwarves we have, not counting Thorin, kind of all stand in for one another, right? They don't have much of a personality. Like, they don't have individual personalities.
We're both having difficulty remembering who did what, because they're all kind of the same at this point.
But even as you read most of the book, you get some things like we go, oh, these people like to eat a lot, or like Bomber's fat. You know what I mean? Like we don't have Dwalin and Balin are brothers, but that's not a lot that's given to us. And I think actually we've been learning about as readers trying to engage with some of these older books. And while The Hobbit and Narnia are not old books, they are very much influenced by older things and therefore kind of retain that medieval spirit to them. I don't just mean like a medieval setting. I mean the actual. They have much more, like something like The Hobbit has more in line with Chaucer than it even does with like Peter Pan, right? Even though obviously it's written much closer to Barry than it is to the Canterbury Tales or something like that. But as we read through these, as we read through this particular chapter, I'm thinking about, I am just finding it to be more fairy tale-esque than I had realized, especially because we just don't have all of the history there. In many ways, Lord of the Rings does not feel like a fairy tale because it feels much more like a history, because there is a history there, right? Every little thing that's being described, you're like, oh, Tolkien knows what's going on. Whereas his writing here kind of feels like, well, I don't know what's in that castle.
Yeah.
Well, who knows what's there?
It also feels more lively and improvised. It seems like he's almost making it up as he goes, which lends to the fairy tale.
Yeah.
Piece.
Well, Bilbo, let's just get back to the text here. Bilbo very much wants to be back in his nice hobbit hole by the fire, but alas, it is raining and it is nighttime, and Gandalf has disappeared. He has gone missing.
And it's not a great time because he could have helped with the fire, and he definitely could have helped once they see a light in the distance.
A light
and
off.
Bilbo goes to investigate.
Yeah, a light off in the distance. And obviously, like we said, there's not even a fire that they could make. One of the ponies falls into the river. And all of this, again, by the way, just to talk more about these dwarves and the way that they're characterized by Tolkien, they're done often in pairs, too. So Dori and Nori are the ones who shared Bilbo's views about regular meals. We have Owen and Glóin, who were the best at making fire. We have Fili and Kili, who are nearly drowned here, right? And by the way, we'll talk about this, maybe not for this episode, but we actually... Douglas Anderson points out where all of these names come from. They come from one particular place that we've been doing this too long, that Tolkien is pulling them from. Out. Yeah, no, they're not going to let us do that. But you're exactly right. They see this fire far off, and after just a little bit of discussion, it is decided that, well, Bilbo's job is to be the burglar. So he is sent off to look at this fire and tell us a little bit about what he sees.
Well, as he's leaving, they say, if you can't get back, hoot twice like a barn owl.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can. So with that lack of help, but also he's not really sure what that means, he then goes off and he finds these 2 trolls.
2?
3 trolls.
3 trolls.
He finds 2 trolls and a 3rd troll.
That's right. There you go. You're just paying attention, right? And I will read the paragraph where the trolls are introduced because it is just fantastic. So Bilbo gets right up to the fire, and Tolkien says this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting round a large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on long spits of wood and licking the gravy off their fingers. There was a fine toothsome smell. Also, there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. I want to pause real quick, because think about what Bilbo desperately wants in this moment. He wants his home. He wants the comfort of his home. And the first part of this paragraph is toasting mutton on wood, licking gravy off with your fingers, a toothsome smell, there's good drink at hand, right? It actually feels somewhat comforting, right? It feels somewhat inviting, right? That toothsome smell, right? Something that's so like tempting in many ways. But then the pivot is a short 4-word sentence. But they were trolls. Obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that. From the great heavy faces of them and their size and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing room fashion at all. And they go on to speak.
We haven't had nothing but mutton for 3 stinking days.
That's right. Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls.
Never a blinking bit of man-flesh have we had for long enough,
said a second.
What the hell William was a-thinking to bring us into these parts? It all beats me.
And they just go on, and they speak in this kind of Cockney accent, right? They're hilarious. They're probably the funniest characters in the whole Legendarium.
They're telling each other to shut up. They're getting into arguments. They're very brutish.
The great thing, again, and I do want to spend a little bit of time with Tolkien's actual word choices here, like we did in that one paragraph, is a little bit down. We're not going to read all of it. We don't want to get in too much trouble with the Tolkien estate here. But William, one of those trolls, says to Bert that you've eaten up an entire village and a half between y'all. Stop complaining about all of the things. You've been eating all these people, right? It's been so great. And then there's one sentence here. And then he took a big bite off a sheep's leg he was roasting, and he wiped his lips on his sleeve. Yes, I am afraid trolls do behave like that, even those with only one head each. It's great because you're not sure what Tolkien's apologizing for. Like, is he apologizing for the trolls that ate an entire village of people, or one who wiped his food on his sleeve?
It's a great combination of 2 things. Even worse, he wiped his mouth on his sleeve. I like to picture William as kind of the nerdy one. Maybe like a Dave Bautista with glasses.
Okay, in Blade Runner 2049 kind of deal. And I will say the whole idea with even those with only one head each, that might be a weird line, but if you go back to a lot of fantasy literature, I wouldn't say fantasy, more fairy tale literature and folk tales ones that Tolkien, especially Nordic ones that Tolkien would have been familiar with, you see trolls that have many different heads. It's a pretty regular thing. When we think of trolls, we do not think of, at least I don't think of that because of
Harry Potter.
well, but all kinds of just more other modern stories. There's quite a few. It really starts, you look at someone like Andrew Lang as he retells some stories with trolls in them. They often have one head. But before that, we talked about Andrew Lang, obviously, a while before on the show. But before that, you see trolls that have lots of different heads. And so that's kind of where Tolkien's getting this line from, just to remind us in case, we're not all caught up on our fantasy reading here.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. We're trying to get better. I do want to pause and say I love stuff like that, because part of the heart of our show is wanting to not just understand books by the MacDonalds and Tolkien's and Lewis's of the world, but really understand what's influencing them. And so you read something like that, even those with only one head each, and you're like, okay. But what Tolkien is actually expecting is that we are familiar with those stories, that when we come up against something like that, we go, oh, yes, because I've read the right books, right? And by the way, that just happens in the very next paragraph. When Bilbo knows what to do, it's because he had read a good many things he had never seen or done. Yeah. So important here. I'm sure many of our readers would highlight that as well, too. Bilbo knew it. He had read of a good many things he had never seen or done. Very, very different than our friend Eustace Clarence Scrubb, right, who had not read any of the right books. Right. Bilbo is. And this is Tolkien reminding us of the importance of reading books about things you haven't done, right? You're going to meet, Lewis says, right, you're going to meet those evil things out there in the world. So hopefully you have heard of chivalrous knights who can defeat dragons. Back when we had Dr. Marcos on the show, it was like season 4. It's been a while. And he talked about Lewis's disdain for school stories, right? And the reason he had that disdain for it was because it kind of actually makes kids more arrogant, right? They see themselves becoming the famous football player, or they see themselves becoming the cheerleader, or whatever, the most popular person, instead of actually seeing themselves defeat, or seeing someone better than them, which is even more important, defeat the dragon, right? And so Bilbo, having read the books, the things that he hasn't done is actually great. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, like, well, we want kids to be able to, especially in education these days, we want kids to be able to read about things they can relate to, right? Or that they can, they can really see themselves in this character, right? And there's many different ways we can interpret that, but one of the ways that's often meant is simply, this person acts like they would. They have the same tendencies that they do. Which I actually think the most kind of, I don't love using this word, but the most kind of problematic way to try to look for literature for children is like, this protagonist acts just like this child does. Like, they're selfish too, or they have these things. And actually, most of the time, that's actually not what Tolkien and Lewis are pointing us to, right? Even when you have a character like Eustace, or you have, a character that's maybe greedy like Gollum, right? They're next to all these other brave and courageous characters, or they're next to the characters who actually uphold the virtues that we want our children, or even us as adults, to embody. And I just, this is probably one of my, over the last few years as I've reread The Hobbit, this line of Bilbo having read a good many things he had never seen or done is, well, Bilbo's prepared because he was reading things greater than himself.
Also, just the way that Tolkien refers to these other stories and shows the benefit of reading them. It does two things. One, it fills in details that you may not have. If this is your first fantasy book, which honestly I think is probably true for a lot of people, this is the first fantasy book that you start with because it's aimed at a younger crowd, or it's more.
No, it certainly is. It very much is.
And it's more accessible by an early crowd is the main thing, and a younger crowd. But so it clues you in, like, now I know that there are multi-headed trolls, but this one is not that. So this is different than this other thing I just learned about. But it also makes you want to go read the other things.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it gives you an insight into this character. It actually reminds me of Don Quixote, where he is just completely saturated. His mind is full of these stories of Knight's Tales. And it prepares him for what's next. in hilarious ways, but he kind of overdoes it, where he's delusional in
All the time.
in what he's seeing.
Are you reading that right now?
Yeah, and that's I like to pick really long audiobooks so they last a long time. And
Okay.
that's one that I'm in the middle of.
That's really impressive. I have not read that since high school.
You read it in high school?
We had to read it
And
in high
me
school.
listening to it
But I
is
don't
impressive.
I don't know. We did mostly read whole books. We did not read a lot of excerpts, but it is so long that I'm trying to remember.
That would have been most of high school.
Yeah, it would have taken up the whole year. And there's a bunch of, like, that same year we read some of Thomas Mallory. We definitely read, like, Jane Eyre. This is my sophomore year of high school. A bunch of other stuff. And there's no way we read all of Cervantes.
I feel like most modern bestseller type things are around like 16, 17 hours at the most.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have really big
How long
books.
is this? Like 40 hours or something?
Yeah, 43.
Yeah.
43 or 46.
It's like the first novel, really. Often considered in the Western canon to be the very first novel.
Yeah.
It's like that, or you can fight over, like, if it's Daniel Defoe, right? But I think Quixote, when is that 16? It's early 1600s, right? I can't remember exactly. And Robinson Crusoe would be almost like 100 years later. So, yeah.
I didn't realize Robinson Crusoe was so old.
Yeah, no, it's pretty old. It's a lot earlier than something like Treasure Island or like Kidnapped or something like that. I think it gets kind of thrown in with those similar things, but it's significantly earlier. All right, sorry, we're off topic. Let's get back to The Hobbit itself.
No one give us a 4-star review because we talked about Robinson Crusoe.
We are. This is part of the idea, though. Again, and this is helpful for people who are joining us for the first time for Tolkien. We want to go further up and further into these other classic works. We really do believe Tolkien and Lewis and MacDonald, all these people we've read so far, are pointing us back further and further back into the canon of great literature. And again, that's that whole, like, that's why we brought up the trolls, because the three-headed trolls I think it's in the history of The Hobbit that John Rateliff says it doesn't. There are no three-headed trolls in Middle Earth. Like, that doesn't show up. There's no other multi-headed trolls. He's legitimately just referring to things.
Other stories.
I think it's in the Blue Fairy book that Andrew Lang had. Maybe it's the Red Fairy book or the. I kind of like that Andrew Lang did that, but also it's super confusing when you're trying to remember which one you have, and that stuff gets. He has, like, at one point, like, the teal. Like, we run out of regular colors. Like, there's a periwinkle, like, fairy book. You're like, I can't keep up with this anymore. Yeah. All right, sorry. Let's get back here to the trolls. Speaking of fairy tales and things very much unlike the Lord of the Rings, when Bilbo eventually gets up to these trolls and he takes out the purse, what happens?
They catch him instantly.
Because the purse speaks.
Yeah.
Right? The purse speaks. That's not something you see. Like, Aragorn doesn't have a speaking purse in the Lord of the Rings, but this purse does speak. Very much this kind of fairy tale-esque thing. And yes, that's exactly when Bilbo is caught. Tell us about this.
He's caught by trolls who are not super smart, but they're very strong, so they hold on to him long enough that he ends up remaining captured, and other people come trying to help, and they get them as well.
Some great comedic bits here, too, because this is where Bilbo says he's a burra hobbit, right?
Yes, he starts to say that he's a burglar, and then changes it to a hobbit in the middle of the word, and then they take that to mean a burra hobbit. So we have a burra hobbit said multiple times right after that.
And then the trolls also ask him, do you have lots? Yeah, are there anyone else with you? He's like, lots. I mean, no one, right?
And they're like, well, how can that be? And they won't let him go until he can explain.
You gotta explain
how
this
can
stuff.
it be both?
Right, yeah. There's, you're exactly right, though. Eventually the rest of the dwarves show up. And again, this is where the dwarves really are not impressive. Thorin is the only one who is, because he doesn't quite get caught. But the dwarves, again, there are 12 dwarves besides Thorin. That's a lot. That's a dozen dwarves, and they show up one by one, and they get picked off one by one by trolls putting sacks over their heads. And there's a great...
Here's my question. Where did they get this many sacks?
No, I think we're told. Aren't we told that they had the sacks for the mutton? Am I wrong about that?
That's just the logistics of this are astounding. I guess these trolls are really large, and maybe they're putting all the sacks in other sacks, but
Yeah, no, listen to this. With sacks in their hands that they use for carrying off mutton and other plunder, they waited in the shadows. So that's, you're not convinced. You're like, nah, I'm not sure about that.
I want 3 or 4 pages of a short story explaining where the sacks came from.
See, that's later Tolkien. This is earlier Tolkien here. But again, there's even that great illustration that Tolkien did himself there. Do you have that in your version?
I do.
Of the trolls, and you're like, okay. This is how the authors, this is not a Pauline Baines type thing where it doesn't line up. This is how Tolkien is envisioning it, which means I think we're supposed to think of it this way. They're pretty big. It is a little embarrassing that all the trolls are caught off guard by this. They show up like, oh, the last guy didn't come back after he left. I guess I'll just walk
You mean
up.
the dwarves?
What did I say?
The trolls.
Oh, I meant to say the dwarves. Sorry. Yes.
The trolls are not caught off guard.
No, the trolls
They
are not
ready.
caught off guard, believe it or not. They're actually a little bit more impressive here. And so the dwarves are all kind of picked off one by one. Again, we're seeing that some of their the arrogance, well, I wouldn't know that it was actually arrogance, but some of their excitement just about a month earlier in the halls of Bag End, as they're saying, oh, we're going to go defeat this dragon and stuff. It's like, well, I can barely even handle these 3 dim-witted trolls.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm pretending a little bit that I haven't read the entire thing, but this feels like a trial run. Gandalf is letting them fail a little bit before he steps in to kind of warm up the crowd, get him in the right mindset. And I'm pretty sure because of the line, there was some mischief that got into the fire and they weren't able to start a fire. I'm pretty sure that was Gandalf too, nudging them toward, here are these trolls over here. Let's go get started by trying to steal something, having it not work, and then I'll step in.
No, I think this is a great theory. I think the idea that Gandalf is very much trying to have them have this adventure makes a lot of sense because they kind of fail, right? Not kind of. They completely fail. Gandalf saves them, right?
Yeah.
It's a complete failure. But hopefully maybe they're starting to see, wow, we actually really need Bilbo. I mean, again, if the purse hadn't squeaked, Bilbo would at least have gotten away. I mean, that's unfortunate that this happens, but Bilbo actually is probably maybe Thorin looks the best. It's like Thorin, then Bilbo, then the rest of the dwarves. It's in some ways kind of helping Bilbo feel like he's more, maybe potentially having Bilbo be more accepted by the rest of the dwarves here. It doesn't quite happen. And I will say one of the things that, and it's hard not to think about it. We don't want to think too much about the movies here. We'll record thoughts on them like over the Patreon for our Dancing Lawn podcast. We don't want to get too much into it here, but I think one of the things the movie did I thought was frustrating is it really overemphasized in the first movie, the unexpected journey, right? It really overemphasized Bilbo wanting to be a part of the dwarves and not being accepted. I feel like one of the biggest themes is, Martin Freeman's Bilbo is like, I want to be accepted. I want to be included. And yet here, Bilbo joins, but you don't really get the sense that he's like desperate to be thought of as an equal to the dwarves. In fact, the dwarves again here kind of look like doofuses. They don't look all that impressive to begin with.
Yeah. I did find myself wanting to see the movie version just to see how certain things were represented.
Oh, sure.
Because so much work goes into the design and the execution of, you have to make things real.
I'm still of the mind, again, we'll listen to the Patreon episode if you want to. It'll probably come out whenever we get to where the end of the first movie is. We'll do one for each movie. I'm still of the mind that the first movie is actually pretty good if you fast forward through all the bad parts. This is kind of a ridiculous thing to say, but I really mean it. Like if you take out all of the extraneous parts that are not in the book, I think the movie's pretty good. Again, the movie though I think is like 2.5 hours long. If you make it 90 minutes, it's a pretty good movie, legitimately. But the big problem is you got to fast forward through all of it.
May you never have to testify in court. I'm actually innocent if you take out all the things I did wrong.
All the illegal things.
Are you watching it in this fantasy scenario?
Yes.
Are you watching it in 3D?
I did watch all three of them in 3D.
I watched all of them in 3D.
And I still am nauseous 15 years later. All right, well, leaving behind some of our thoughts on the movie again, patreon.com/the Narnia podcast. You can hear our thoughts eventually about that. But back to the actual book itself.
Let's talk about the way Gandalf helps them out.
Yes, he helps them out as they're all arguing over how exactly they're going to eat them. Are they going to cook them, or are they going to squash them like jelly? Are they going to boil them? Which, by the way, speaking of cook, I forgot one of my favorite Bilbo lines in the whole book. We passed over here, which is when Bert asks Bilbo what he means about lots having none and lots all at the same time. And Bilbo says, "Oh, what'd I say?" said Bilbo, gasping. "And please don't cook me, fine sirs. I'm a good cook myself, and I cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you won't have me for supper." And I always love I cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. Bilbo, he's so fun in that kind of way. Like, I really love that Bilbo who likes to kind of play with words a little bit and who is a little cheeky, you know?
Yeah. And also, he's not helping himself because he's confusing.
They're not going to pick
characters.
up on that like
Right. They're completely not receiving it. We've seen them interact enough that we know that they're not getting it.
Well, and Bilbo's this wealthy, respectable hobbit, and in some ways he doesn't know how to relate to both the kind of grimy dwarves who have lived a lot of their lives underground and have really had to work hard for for what they've got, what little they have, right? As the dwarves who've lost the mountain. But then he also doesn't know how to like these very uneducated, simple trolls. He doesn't know how to communicate with them well, which is always fun to see him kind of this fish out of water. Of this is the guy with the his brass buttons and his nice waistcoat that he's wearing on his adventure into the wild.
Yeah.
All right, but back now to Gandalf appearing. Gandalf does appear, and he does one of the most famous things in all of really children's literature, I think, in many ways, which is getting the trolls to argue and fight until dawn comes.
Yes. He pretends to be different ones at different times, restarting arguments that have already been settled, making them change their minds and start arguing again. It happens over and over, and then they argue so much that they forget that it's dawn and the sun comes up and they turn to stone.
They're all turned to stone. And we learned that, yes, it was Gandalf who was behind a tree or a bush, I think. And he's doing exactly what you just said. And when they come out, they untie the sacks. Oh, which is so awful. You always forget. The dwarves were these were sacks used for all these things they were carrying off, the mutt and all these things. And the dwarves were in there face first with just their feet hanging out. They are not happy.
They were nearly suffocated, it says, and very annoyed. The juxtaposition of those two is pretty fantastic.
This is a place where I want to just pause for a moment because it's in this section in Anderson's annotated Hobbit where he actually points out something that Tolkien says about the way he addresses the readers. And he does this right here, right before the trolls are turned to stone. So I'm kind of going back just a tiny bit because Tolkien makes a change from, he originally had said that made kind of an appeal to the audience where I told you William had already had as much supper as he could hold. And he changes that to just say he already had as much supper as he could hold. So he no longer says, I told you. And in 1967, Tolkien speaks a little bit about this style of writing, the way he addresses the audience, which he doesn't really do at all, obviously, in Lord of the Rings. And we brought this up. And I actually want to read a little bit of Tolkien's own words about how he changed this style. The Hobbit, this is Tolkien speaking, was written in what I should now regard as bad style, as if one were talking to children. There's nothing my children loathed more. They taught me a lesson. Anything that in any way marked out The Hobbit as for children instead of just for people they disliked instinctively. I do too, now I think about it. All this I won't tell you anymore. You think about it stuff. Oh, now they loathe it. It's awful. Children aren't a class. They are merely human beings at differing stages of maturity. I really like this.
Me too. I also remember that everything I was reading was characters and people, and the way people were addressed is a little bit older than me because at the time I was looking forward and I wanted to be older and more mature. And having someone speak down to you and over-explain everything would definitely get annoying.
And there's a way to do that. Like I think Lewis, my kids and I are just reading through Dawn Treader at the very end, but there's a few different times where I'm trying to think one in particular. But Lewis, a couple times in that book, he does in other ones too, says like, oh, I don't know the story of how this got here on this island, but if I ever find out, I'll tell you more about it. It isn't let me talk down to you because you don't know anything. It's more like, oh, hey, by the way, I just want to. It's more world building and more invitational to readers, especially those younger readers, right? But it's not a let me condescend towards you because you like again, which is why I think he took out this, but not all the other asides to the audience. I think he took out this. I told you he already had some, because that does feel like a let me tell you, child, in case you forgot. Yeah. Whereas the other ones are more, again, I think that invitational piece is what's more important when you're having those asides to the readers.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's finish up this chapter here. They do go ahead. They find Bilbo brings out the key. He's gotten the key, which he was very lucky. Very important, right? It was luck that the key fell out before it obviously would have turned to stone as well too. And they go into the trolls' hoard and they find some swords. We'll talk more about the swords and the dagger that Bilbo picks up, maybe in the next chapter, because that's when we learn about what the runes say on them.
Just to give a preview, the wizard says, these look like good blades, and then makes a reference to the fact that they're not made by trolls or any smith among men. So that's a little bit of a hint to where they may have come from.
And they decide to go ahead, and the stuff they take out with them, they bury it. They do, again, this is what we're told, that Gandalf does some kind of spell, right, to keep them hidden, which is very interesting. We don't hear a lot about spells. Putting a great many spells over them, actually, multiple spells.
I was going to say a multitude of them.
Here's okay, wait, it says, then they brought up, are the dwarves doing spells, or is Gandalf just the main one doing that as they say they are putting them out?
It has to be Gandalf, right? What are they going to do?
I don't know. I don't think they have. I don't know. There's much. Well, there's a little bit of magic about hobbits, right? In the way that they can kind of pass unseen and those things. But I don't remember knowing much. And again, we could get a little bit more into how dwarves are different and where they come from. At, those first few chapters of the Silmarillion. We're not going to do that because we're trying to read the Hobbit as a standalone text, even though we've struggled a little bit tonight, right? It's hard, but it's hard to do. But we're trying to read it that way. So I'm not thinking about, well, how dwarves technically are made, they're created differently than elves and men, but I'm not going to get into that. We're not going to bring in the Silmarillion here.
Here's what I think they're doing.
Okay.
I think the dwarves think they're doing spells, just like when you give your son a controller for a PlayStation while you're
they
playing
pretend
the
like
Switch.
you're playing.
I think that's what's so they think they put some spells on. That's how the
fine.
story is going to be told. But Gandalf is doing all the work.
He's doing all the work. Well, then Gandalf does tell Thorin that he was just looking ahead, and what brought him back was simply looking behind. Then he tells them they are going to Rivendell, and that's the end of the chapter. Any final things you want to say about this chapter?
When I was putting together the summary, I was struck by how it's going one way, it gets worse, it gets even worse, then we have a resolution, and then you have a hint of what's coming next, both trouble and Rivendell. And if you've read The Lord of the Rings before, then you already know that Rivendell is going to be a positive thing, most likely. But just to have a whole little mini narrative structure within a chapter is pretty cool to see. Yeah. And it leaves you wanting more. And the challenge with preparing for the show is always stopping.
That's right. It's
actually hard to do an episode if I read the next chapter. So I have to wait until we've recorded, and then I can go for it. Otherwise, I keep referring to things that aren't. You have to remind me this wasn't in that chapter.
Yeah, we were. So I've told you I've been both reading and listening to the podcast or to the chapters as we get ready for it. And we were driving home today for a little weekend out of town, and we were going to listen to the Rob Ingalls version of Chapter 2. We did Chapter 1, we did Andy Serkis. This one we did Rob Ingalls. So we're listening to it in the car, and we get to the end of Chapter 2, and I turn it off. My son's in the back. He's like, "Hey, what about the next chapter? I love the elves, right?" Because he's read it before. He loves the story. I was like, "No, we're sorry. Remember for the podcast with Uncle Phil, we're not going any further." He's like, "I think the podcast is boring because it doesn't let us read anymore." He's in the back of the car, so frustrated. I'm like, "Look, I said, we'll listen tomorrow because tonight we're recording Chapter 2." But I was like, "Look, Dad gets confused. If I listen to the next chapter, I will start to blend them both together, and I'll bring up the wrong thing. So I can't go any further right now.
Then we start losing the positive reviews. Then we take a hit in the finances. He doesn't
really
want
hurt.
that.
He doesn't want. He wants to go to college one day.
Right.
Yeah. We
What-
need the
what
podcast
are we doing
money.
this for?
Yeah. That's the only reason we started the podcast.
This is going to buy his books.
One, it's gonna buy.
It's going to buy his book.
Yeah, it's gonna buy a book. All right. Well, before we actually end the chapter. Well, let me tell you where we're going. Speaking of next chapters, next time we're gonna read chapter 3, where the company finds an uneasy rest amongst the elves of Rivendell. And that's in A Short Rest, the name of the chapter. But before we go, we'll hold off on some listener feedback as we get this new segment going, Enchanted Epistles. And I'm actually going to read 2 things for you today.
Ooh.
The first is something we have read before on the show, but then I want to read it and compare it to something written a little bit later. And both come from our friend C.S. Lewis. So in 1937, the year that this book is published, Lewis said this in a review of The Hobbit, and listeners will remember this because I've read it before. It must be understood that this, meaning The Hobbit, is a children's book only in the sense that the first of many readings can be undertaken in the nursery. Alice is read gravely by children and with laughter by grown-ups. The Hobbit, on the other hand, will be funnier to its youngest readers, and only years later, at a 10th or 20th reading, will they begin to realize what depth, scholarship, and profound reflection have gone to make everything in it so ripe, so friendly, and in its own way so true. Prediction is dangerous, but The Hobbit may well prove a classic. Okay, great words from our friend Jack Lewis. Here we go, about 21 years later.
Oof.
Just about exactly 21 years later, because it's October of 1958.
So
and
this
he's
is after the Lord of the Rings.
4 years after The Lord of
And
the Rings.
all of the Narnia books are out?
Yes, they've been out for 2 years at this point. All of them. The last battle came out in 56. So here he is. He's writing from Magdalen College in Cambridge, because he's working at Cambridge at this point. And he's writing to Mr. Thomas Howard, who was an American who was just writing to him. We know Lewis he responded to most of the people who wrote to him. And Howard was an author himself. Dear Mr. Howard, and again, this is going to sound a little funny the way it starts, but we don't have Howard's letter. We only have Lewis's response, right? Oh, but believe me, you were still only paddling in the glorious sea of Tolkien. Go on from The Hobbit at once to The Lord of the Rings. 3 volumes and nearly as long as the Bible, and not a word too long, except for the first chapter, which is a botch. Don't be put off by it. That's great. The Hobbit is merely a fragment of his myth, detached and adapted for children, and losing much by the adaptation. The Lord of the Rings is the real stuff. Thanks for all the nice things you say about my own little efforts. Yours sincerely, C.S. Lewis.
Wow.
And by the way, just before we talk about this, he writes, the Lord of the R is the real stuff. Like, why couldn't he write the word ring?
Yep.
He does that in so many of his letters that you're like, it's a 5-letter word. It's not.
Just do LOTR if you're going
Yeah, like, so, it doesn't exist yet, I guess.
So you
but
said he was doing wood with WD,
he often did, yes.
and that saves 3 letters. And it
This is
just
so much-
adds up. You say 3 letters here.
Yeah. So here you go. The Hobbit is merely a fragment of his myth, detached and adapted for children, and losing much by the adaptation. The Lord of the R is the real stuff. I had a couple of questions for you here. So we're reading 2 different mediums here. The first is a review published, publicly. Mm-hmm. The other is a letter just written to another guy. One is written when there is no Lord of the Rings. In fact, at this point, when Lewis writes this review, there's no such thing as even the New Hobbit. As we know, that was what it was called for a long time, the New Hobbit. And by the time that he's writing to Howard, the Lord of the Rings, all 3 volumes have been published. We know they're not published right at the same time, but he's been able to read all 3 of them. And Lewis would have been familiar with them for the years that led up to their publication, as Tolkien would read them often in their meetings together. What do you make of this?
The first thing that comes to mind is if you're talking publicly about someone, you are going to be more positive.
Sure.
Especially if you have the clout that Lewis has at this.
But at 37, he doesn't have nearly as much clout.
I think
Maybe he's a little, but
he
not a
doesn't
lot.
have the clout that he has later.
At this point, Lewis is by 37. He has not written. I mean, he hasn't done any of the broadcast talks. He's not written the Screw Tape Letters. He's not written The Great Divorce. He has written The Pilgrim's Regress. He's written things like I believe The Allegory of Love has come out at that point. But he's not he's a literary scholar, but he is by no means the household name that he would eventually become.
I think I'm actually talking about from a 1958 perspective.
Oh, you're talking about the later one.
He's
Okay.
not, I didn't realize this when I was first starting, but now that you say that and remind me that he was writing it earlier, in 1958, I think he has so much clout that if he says something negative, it would be even more damaging.
That makes a ton of... Okay, I totally get what you're saying.
But also, I think you and I will both talk way more candidly with each other in private about our opinions on things, especially if it involves other people and their work or something that they're doing, than we might say publicly. But it is pretty wild to hear the two compared to each other. Also, I can't remember anything I did 21 years ago. I think I've changed a lot, and I know that it's different once you're kind of past adolescence.
But if you remember, we read in our very last episode, we read a letter from Lewis from 1933, 4 years before The Hobbit's published, where he says he's had a delightful time reading a children's story which Tolkien has just written. So here's what I think. I don't think Tolkien is being insincere or overly positive in the 30s. I believe... What?
You mean Lewis?
Yeah, did I say Tolkien?
Yeah.
This is going to be hard for a long time. Sorry, everybody. You just have to use context clues, I guess. So here's the irony as someone who always mispronounces things. I guess I will stop mispronouncing things, but just never get any of these people's names right? No.
So anyway, Chaucer says what?
He has a thing called the Parliament of Fowls. So I think that the Lord of the Rings just impacts Lewis so strong. Like, he enjoys it so much.
Because it's so much better to him?
Yeah, that it makes The Hobbit less enjoyable. And I do think this is true of many people that don't take The Hobbit seriously. As someone who, I love The Lord of the Rings. I've read The Hobbit so many more times, not just because, I don't know if I would say I like it more. I'm definitely more familiar with it. I know The Lord of the Rings really well too, but I've read The Hobbit so many more times.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think I do actually like The Hobbit more because I love children's literature. I love these things. But I do think The Hobbit has a hard time as a novel standing on its own. Like, you've got your copy of the book right there. Does it say anything about The Lord of the Rings on the front of the cover?
No.
Okay, that's good then. And on the back, does it say like the preface to Lord of the Rings or anything?
It does. A great modern classic and the prelude to The Lord of the Rings.
And it just, like, nowhere on The Lord of the Rings does it say the book that came after The Hobbit. You know what I mean? Like, The Hobbit is just the little brother to the much more important work of The Lord of the Rings. And I would say The Lord of the Rings, I think, is the greater work. I'm not trying to say it isn't. But I do think that in some ways The Hobbit is often appreciated. And we've done this tonight. We've talked about this. This is why I brought up this particular letter. I think most people struggle, ourselves included, to read The Hobbit out of the context of The Lord of the Rings. We're often just comparing it to what it isn't. And I think that's what we hear from Lewis here, right? The Hobbit is merely a fragment of his myth, detached and adapted for children. Which is interesting, too, because we know that the mythology has not been built out by the time that it's published. So it's a little bit of revisionist history by Lewis here, although, to be honest, I don't know what he does and doesn't know. Like, we know all of this because Christopher Tolkien has just written so many things about the creation of the legendarium. I really don't know. Jack is living through all of this, but I actually don't. We don't know how much he knows. He's not read every manuscript.
Right. And also, where is their friendship in 58?
It is struggling by 58. That might not be there. Maybe that's too dramatic. In 58, remember in 58, he has just recently gotten married.
He's just gotten married. That was a big deal for Tolkien because he felt that Lewis should not marry her.
So in 57 is when the his like real the real marriage occurs, the spiritual, right, the ecclesial marriage through the church. It's in 56 that he has the civil marriage. So in 58, I mean, yeah, he's very much in that space. And I don't know. I mean, there's many people who would know more about this, but we do know that there is a bit of a fallout over his marriage to Joy. And it never is they stopped being friends, but they were certainly closer in the 30s and 40s than they were in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
And I mean, when we met Douglas Gresham, Doug Gresham told us that even after Lewis died, Tolkien invited him to come live with him, and instead Gresham went back to boarding school. But like they were close enough that like he was like, Tullers reached out to me and said, you can come live with me. So it wasn't like they weren't speaking. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. I mean, like they were still close enough that Douglas Gresham had a relationship with Tolkien, even though he'd only been in Lewis's life for less than 10 years at that point. Well, a little bit more than 10 years, but 10, because she dies in 60. So this is happening in 60. Yeah, they start corresponding just right after 1950, I believe. So I might have some of my stuff a little off there, so my apologies. But yeah, so
I'm just curious if that informs Lewis's private messages at all. If he's a little miffed, and that's maybe coloring his perception of the work.
But he's speaking so highly of Lord of the Rings. He's like, it's as long as the Bible and not a word too long, except that first chapter, right? Like, I just think, I think one of the things I want to think about and ponder on as we go through the reading of this entire book is trying to, as hard as it is, to view The Hobbit as not the little brother of the Lord of the Rings, but as its own great work. And even seeing that for someone like Lewis, that is a difficult thing to do. He's like, no. I mean, like, good you read that, but like, the Lord of the Rings is the real stuff. Like, so it's just something for us to be thinking about as we try to go through this book.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're coming at this from a let's view this as its own thing, but also aware of the context of the Lord of the Rings, because at this point you cannot separate the two. No, because they both exist. But it is interesting to hear this evolution because he's experiencing it before almost anybody else.
Yes,
maybe anybody else.
Oh yeah, I mean he's there with the rest of the Inklings, he's the one urging Tolkien on to keep writing the new Hobbit.
Right, and at the very beginning, I don't know if Tolkien had shared it with anybody.
I don't know all the details of that, but it very much was a part. I think many people were reading it in the Inklings. He read it out loud.
I'm talking about the very first meeting where
I don't know.
He's almost nervous to ask Lewis to read it.
Well, those first meetings, it would have been even back in like the Coal Biters, right? The Coal Bitars, which was before they were the Inklings. That was kind of the name of their group. He's reading The Hobbit out loud at that point, right? Like that's long before that. So I do think that Lewis and the rest of those guys would have heard really the new Hobbit from the very beginning. Yeah. So, well, we've had a lot to talk about in this episode. We were trying to keep every episode this season right around an hour. I feel like we have probably failed without looking at the time.
Your scheduled lights went off.
They did, yes. That's how late we've been podcasting. But Phil, before we go, any final things we should say, or should we go straight to the end credits?
We're only 2 chapters in, but I feel like we're slipping into this world again, and not a moment too soon, moment too late.
I know what you mean. Even if you said it wrong.
It's a really good time to slip back into this just because it's I'm thinking about all the details, all the stuff about the swords, and we're barely scratching the surface.
I'm pretty sure we get a name drop for Gondolin. See, no, it's so hard. We're not supposed to talk about that. It's so hard to not.
You built this prison for yourself, made up rules.
All right, well, let's go ahead and let's thank the people who made this episode possible.
Absolutely. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can then listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, Andrew Trophy, Becca Brown, Christiana Line, and Ian Wooten for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be emailed to hello@lampostlistener, and voicemails can be left at 406-646-6733. You can also find previous episodes, links, and book information at lampostlistener.com. A review on Apple Podcasts would also help other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back soon.